You guys pay your utility bills or included in your rent? I think you have a choice. So the choice is you can pay higher for green energy or you can pay lower for dirty energy.
How do you know that they're giving you green energy though?
Who knows, right? You turn on the light and it glows brighter, I don't know. But you have that choice. And that money apparently would be allocated to supporting wind infrastructure. Sask Power is a really strong monopoly. I've worked, my area of research is forestry, and the forest industry is in the tank right now. And there's a lot of talk of bioenergy. So if you go to places like northern Sweden, northern Finland, they get almost all their energy from renewable sources, northern Sweden for sure. I was there about a year ago and we went to this plant where they harvest the trees from private land, so everybody's got an incentive because those trees are valuable. They get services from the government to help them with the land management and wildlife and all the other stuff. The trees are cut periodically, taken to this plant, and they're all chipped up and whatever, and they make energy out of it. The energy goes into the city boiler, and there's a district heating system. So imagine Saskatoon's got a couple of different plants. Everybody is on the same heat. So you would get all your heat energy from this particular plant. Nothing is wasted, and it's 100% renewable. Why don't we do that here?
Something like it's like general, so like the boilers is for the whole kind of.
Yeah, they're local, like a small municipality would have their own wood heat.
And here, like every house has its own boiler.
Yeah, you're hooked up to power, you can get power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really strange.
Yeah, so why don't we do that here in northern Saskatchewan?
Actually, Sask Power just made a deal, I think by like 2014, they're building a biofuel plant in Meadow Lake.
Oh, okay.
So that'll be, and it's like a lot of money going into it, I guess.
Up until now, this option has been off the table. And technically, you can sell power back to the grid. This was one of the problems with the pulp mill in PA. The steam generated from cooking all the pulp was enough to power that plant and half of Prince Albert, or all of Prince Albert for half a year or something like that. Could they sell the power back to the grid? Technically, legally, yes. But the red tape and the problem of going through that was such that it wasn't worth it. So they didn't. You've got a monopoly here that is, it's kind of strange because the Saskatchewan government says they want to be green, but they're wasting all this power. And that was true for a lot of individuals who were, I don't know, steam, wood, whatever, producing power as a byproduct of whatever it was they're producing. So we've got these political things going on where you've got a monopoly. It is regulated somewhat by the government, but they have so much power, they have so much market power that it's actually shutting down new, greener alternatives. So you look at the problem, you say, well, why is that? A lot of it is policy and government regulation. So it's good to hear that that will happen. Would you say 2020?
I think they were going to start building in 2014.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it'll be quicker. So one of the questions the grad students in the class have to answer, we're going to Sweden, so you're going to get a week off in November sometime. Nice. You don't like the class?
Just 5 days.
I'm crying. Yeah, but there's travel on two ends. It takes for bloody ever to get there. So we're going to go to this plant. We're going to go to a bunch of other places, and the grad students have to do research. And the question is, why are we not as advanced as the Scandinavian countries? Because they're much farther north. The populations are relatively small. They're remote. Same kind of climate. It's cold and it's darker. So why are these things not happening in Saskatchewan? So.
And what's the major energy from this? So like you use gas or coal?
Coal.
Coal.
Yeah. Coal.
Is it technically and legally allowed to build, for example, for the neighborhoods, their own station or wind power unit to create the energy, or is it very expensive? I don't know.
Wind power is super expensive, and to put the infrastructure in, it costs a lot of money. And actually in a lot of places in southern Saskatchewan, it's too windy. Go figure. The turbines go so fast that they just like crap out. Plus it kills some birds and bats and stuff. And I know that because I'm in the wildlife thing.
It's really noisy.
And it's super noisy. It creates tremendous externalities. For the people who live in those areas, they hate it. Yeah.
Because for sure, I work in Toronto, also the energy.
Yeah.
And it's problem for the remote volunteers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Have you seen in Turkey that they get sun generated energy on their roofs?
Yes.
Everyone did.
Somewhere.
So this is the last one. It's externalities. And basically an externality is a cost or a benefit that is imposed on somebody by a third party. We typically talk about negative externalities because they cause problems. We don't really talk a lot about positive externalities because people like them. So a negative externality is a cost imposed on a third party, or imposed on someone. And a positive externality is a benefit. So, there's another kind. It's called pecuniary externality, which is not really external, but we'll call it pecuniary effect. So first of all, why do we call it an externality? Why is it external?
Because costs and benefits are not internalized.
Yes. What do you mean by that?
They're not included in costs and benefits, monetary costs and benefits.
Yeah. If I'm making a decision, if I'm a business person making a decision, and let's say I'm working in the tar sands and I want to pump oil, and there's going to be a bunch of dead ducks in the future because they land in my scummy pond, I'm not going to pay for that, and I'm not going to consider it unless somebody makes me consider it, because that's a cost to my business. So because I don't consider that cost, I go about my business, I have my marginal cost curve, I know the cost of doing business, the permitting and all this other stuff, and the drilling for oil and pumping it and taking it wherever. But I am not including the cost of rehab of the land, I'm not including the cost of the wildlife, of any of those effects, those negative effects that occur that have real costs. They have real cost to society, and quite often real cost to individuals, not just like wildlife and the environment. So the cost is external to the decision making. Decisions are made with respect to production. So a company will produce a certain amount and based on a cost curve, and they don't consider those costs. So what tends to happen with a negative externality is that the social cost is higher than the business cost. Because of that, the quantity produced is much higher than what would be efficient. So we go back to our marginal cost equals marginal revenue. So if we draw a picture of this, we wind up with something that looks like this. There's the marginal cost curve, and there's the marginal revenue or demand, whatever we want to call it. Let's call it demand. We have quantity and price. Here's typically where, say, Syncrude would operate. They would produce so many barrels of oil a year, and this would be the price, right? Market conditions, everything else held equal, held constant. This marginal cost is private. It's not public. The cost of doing business, the real cost of doing business, is not reflected in this particular cost curve. It's not reflected in the accounting. If we were to add those costs, this cost curve would probably be up here. And we could call this MSC, the marginal social cost. So what's the effect when a company has to consider the marginal social cost? They will produce a lower quantity and they will increase the price. Because ultimately the consumer eats the extra cost anyway. The price goes up. The effect of that, if we go back to supply and demand, the price goes up, we move along the demand curve. We're less willing to pay for these particular products. Quantity goes down. Okay, so that's pretty simple, right? How do we do that? How could we do this?
The tax.
Mhm. And how much should the tax be?
Enough to make it equal to marginal, like the cost.
Yeah,
to the-
exactly.
to marginal.
We need a tax of, if we're producing this amount, we need the tax to be that amount. So we need to determine, the difference between the private cost and the social cost. So you can see where this might start to be difficult. How do you measure the damages that are caused by private industry? We can do it. There's lots of ways to estimate it. You can measure the cleanup costs, or you can estimate the value of what's being damaged by asking people. We'll talk about that later. So we can tax them and determine how much this amount, what the price is, the difference from the first price to the second price. This would be the tax amount in here. Okay. What do you suppose this picture looks like if we're talking about a positive externality? How would I reflect that with this kind of a diagram?
There'd be some marginal benefit that's not being captured in demand, like people aren't paying for it.
Exactly. So I don't need the social cost anymore. I actually need a different demand curve. So I want you guys to take a second, draw this diagram, the supply and demand, and give me an example of what a positive externality would be, and tell me the effects on price and quantity.